Today we're going to continue our work thinking about World War II, and we're going to start investigating sources. Have you got any grandparents who were in the war? Have you ever asked them about their experiences? Maybe they were a soldier. Maybe they were an evacuee. Maybe they were a nurse or a doctor. Maybe they know someone who lived through the war. Have you ever asked them what it was like? Well, if you weren't there yourself, how might you find out what it was like to live during World War II? What could you use? We could use lots of different sources from different times to investigate the past. Remember, we can use primary and secondary sources to help us find out about the past. Remember, we're looking at sources spelt with an OU, not an AU, so we're not talking about ketchup. Primary sources are things that are actually from the time. They give first-hand experience, such as a diary or an interview. A secondary source gives information about a primary source, but it might not necessarily be from the person or from the time itself. For example, this might be a textbook. When we think about sources, we also think about who is the source from. Is it a reliable source? Is it a reliable author? We also think about what the purpose of the source is. Who is it for? Could there be any bias, for example? And what type of source is it? Is it written? Is it a pictorial source? Could it be open to interpretation, for example? Let's have a look at an example. Here is an example of a newspaper from September 1939. Now, let's have a think about why September 1939 was a very important date. You're right. World War II started in September 1939. Why would this piece of information be important? And how would this impact on the source that we're looking at? Think about how people might have been feeling at this time. Are they more likely to read the newspapers? Do you think the newspapers would be sticking exactly to the facts at that time? Who is this source from? You're right, it was probably from a journalist. And where would that journalist be getting their information from? Is everything in a newspaper always 100% accurate all of the time? Is there a chance there might have been some bias within the newspaper? Maybe from the journalist. Was the article written from an English perspective, a German perspective, a French perspective? Would it have made any difference whether this article was written in England or Germany at this time? What was the purpose of this source? Was it to inform people of the facts of what was going on? Could the purpose be to encourage people to think a certain way or believe a certain thing? Maybe to encourage them to act in a certain way or do something? Could it be to encourage people to maybe support the war or send their loved ones to join the army? Think about the emotion that will have been developing at the time. Could it be to have encouraged people to stay calm and to trust what was going on? What type of source was this? Was it a written source or a pictorial source? How was it presented on the page? How did it catch your eye? How did it make sure that certain pieces of information got across to the reader? How did it emphasize certain pieces of information rather than others? Think about the size of different fonts. Think about the use of bold lettering. Think about capital letters and block capitals. Think about the use of columns. Why do you think England came first in the list of countries? Why did the headline say England, France and 3 other nations broke war on Germany rather than Germany breaking war on the countries? Who had the power? Are there any other key details you notice when you look at this source? What else could it tell you about World War II? Let's have a look at one more example. This is an example of some wartime propaganda which was used to encourage women to take on some jobs and roles to support the war effort. This kind of propaganda was produced in the 1940s. It was produced by the government. This propaganda was produced by the government with the intention of influencing people and the way they thought. It had a direct message, and it was trying to influence the way people thought and the decisions that they made. By the very nature of what propaganda was, this should have you questioning whether there is a bias to each and every example. Would this example have the same message if it was produced by a different country? Is it a reliable source? What is it trying to teach you about World War II? And is this message accurate? By the very nature of the fact that it exists, it is telling you something about the war and the way that people were influenced during that time. What type of source is it? Is it a written source or is it a pictorial source? How has it been presented? How has it been organised on the page to influence you when you look at it? How has colour been used? How has the font been presented? Why has each word been capitalised? And why is an exclamation mark being used? Why is the lady looking at you directly? Why is she holding herself in the way she is? Why has she rolled up her sleeve? Why is she wearing that choice of clothes? Why does it look similar to a uniform or a shirt? And why is she standing in such a masculine position? What message does this suggest? And what can this poster tell you about World War II? Now it's your turn. See if you can investigate some of the different sources and see if you can work out what they tell you about World War II. Don't forget to use these key questions to help you.